Okay, hello and welcome to the final webinar in our series, Restoring Country, Exploring Indigenous-led Participation in Mine Closure and Environmental Services. Next slide. I will begin by acknowledging the Whadjuk Noongar and the Yurruga Turrbal traditional owners and their custodianships of the land in which our team are meeting today and the traditional owners from the lands in which you are joining us. On behalf of our team, I pay our respects to their ancestors and their descendants who continue cultural and spiritual connections to country. We recognise their valuable contributions to Australia and globally. Next slide. I'm Caroline Williams, Yamatji woman from the Midwest Murchison Gascoyne region. My role at CRC Time is Engagement Manager First Nation. I have a background in Aboriginal economic development, education and health. I have a Bachelor's of Social Science, Masters of Business Administration, Diploma of Executive Coaching and further postgrad education. This webinar focus is on education and training around mine closure and rehabilitation. As somebody that sees value in education and what it can do for personal goals and community betterment, I'm passionate about the yarn today. Just to note, we are recording this webinar and we'll be uploading the video to YouTube. We want this series to remain as a resource into the future. This series is a joint initiative of the CRC Time and the Centre for Social Responsibility in Mining, or CSRM. Roger Barnes and Julia Keenan are our partners from CSRM. Give us a wave, Julia and Roger. Also, just to acknowledge Ben Hamilton, who is behind the scenes working today and has been throughout the series. So CSRM is part of the Sustainable Minerals Institute at the University of Queensland. Roger and Julia are part of a team of around 30 social researchers at the centre who are dedicated to examining social and community issues related to resource extraction. Briefly, CRC Time is a partnership of more than 70 collaborating organisations from research, industry, government, community and suppliers, whose aim is to work together to deliver a bold vision to unite Australia's regions in the development and delivery of economic, social and environmentally resilient post-mining futures. As part of this project planning, I would like to mention that CRC Time and CSRM have been involved in a range of research initiatives looking at mine closure and in particular Indigenous people's perspectives. They've encountered a lot of different organisations with experience in this space with a desire to find opportunities for Indigenous participation. This webinar focus is hearing about education and training initiatives available in mine closure. It highlights the existing and prospective training and education for equipping Indigenous people with the skills to lead partnerships and actively participate in mine closure and rehabilitation. Speakers today will share their experiences and perspectives on currently available training in mine closure space, skills gap identification, what skills are needed now and into the future, organisational challenges such as liabilities, partnerships, legal issues, governance and capacity barriers. We've got some excellent speakers lined up to dive a bit deeper into these different perspectives. Before I do, feel free just to share references and questions in the chat as we go. We'll have an opportunity at the end to ask the panel the questions, but I please ask that you be considerate by keeping your questions on topic and as concise as possible, which we'll get to at the end. So for your information, we will also be producing a summary report at the completion of the series to capture the key points, issues for further discussion and the lessons learnt. Okay, so next slide. I'd like to first introduce the panel. Gowan Bush is a proud Nullikan man who was born and bred in the city of Darwin on Larrakia country. He was appointed manager of the Community Education and Training for the Northern Territory Government's Rum Jungle Rehabilitation Project in May 2022. Gowan has worked in Indigenous affairs for the last 30 years. He has held various positions in NGOs, NT and Australian government, working in roles focused on community engagement, community development, stakeholder program facilitation, and contract management across the Northern Territory. Some of these positions were with the Fred Hollows Foundation, Australian Bureau of Statistics, ATSIC, NT Sport and Rec, and Department of Industry, Tourism and Trade. Next is Tim Milson. Tim is the former CEO of the Fremantle Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the Langi Aboriginal Corporation, and current Executive Officer of the Noongar Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Tim owns a number of successful businesses and has been awarded both local and international awards in innovation and export through his UK interests. Tim brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to NCCI and has a passion to help businesses realise their vision. He mentors individuals to help build their capacity and realise their dreams and goals. Finally is Zane Hughes, Wani traditional custodian of Northwest Queensland, and has held leadership roles in a range of mining companies and infrastructure project development companies and Indigenous corporations representing native title holders. He has an in-depth understanding and knowledge of the mining sector, processes and operational drivers. Zane is project for his education project at CRC time and is a research fellow for the Faculty of Science and Engineering at Curtin University. Currently, he is managing the development of several curriculum responses in mine closure and sustainable land management for First Nations communities. Zane is also the chair of the Mining and Automotive Skills Alliance Mining Sector Strategic Workforce Advisory Panel, SWAP. The SWAP is made up of mining industry stakeholders who provide input about workforce skills needs. Okay. So we're just going to jump into some of the questions now. I'll start off with Tim. Tim, can you tell us about the Chamber network and some of the work you're involved in mine closure and rehabilitation services? And from your experience with the First Nations membership, what are some of the common concerns?
Yeah, sure. So, Kaya Wanju from Perth. We are on Wajak Noongar country here. My background is of entrepreneur. I actually invented a thing called the cat's whisker, which is a brush that goes around the wheel arches of commercial vehicles. You may have seen it on trucks and lorries. I came to Australia in 2007 and was fortunate enough to write a business program called Small Business Solutions, for which we tried to run this out. It was mainstream. It was funded by the government over in Western Australia, and we tried to run it out into the Aboriginal community, but that sector just wasn't ready at that time to that level of understanding business. So I had 6 years at the Fremantle Chamber of Commerce, where basically we had a very successful time. And then I did 2 years with the Burrubalangi Thalangi. They're a pilbara mob, and it's where Gorgon and Wheatstone were being built on their land. And I saw how difficult it was for Aboriginal people to be engaged with the corporate sector and the government sector. And I've got a phone call one day from a fella called Gordon Cole, who I'd met previously when I tried to run the Small Business Solutions program out. And he said that he wanted to set up a Chamber of Commerce and would I help? So I've been on the journey with them now for 6 years, and we've now got 600 members. We're the fastest growing chamber, as far as I know, in Australia, and we're the fastest growing sector. So Aboriginal business sector is growing at a remarkable rate. We call it the sleeping giant, and that sleeping giant is very much awake, and they're reclaiming their trade and industry, which they've been doing for 65,000 years. So it's just a natural reclaim of prior to colonisation. So the sort of work that I do with them is I sort of help them in get into business, but I also help them do pre-quals for, large contracts. And we've got a hub in Subiaco where we've got 10 Aboriginal businesses working out of there. When we first started, those 10 businesses were employing about 35 people between them, turning over around about 4 or 5 million. Today, that same 10 businesses are still in that hub, employing around about 450 and turning over in excess of $60 million. So that clustering of Aboriginal knowledge and sharing of the cultural experience certainly works, and it's something that I've sort of been very proud to be part of. We basically have been doing quite a lot of work with the mining companies on the restoration of land. One of the things that we've developed, and if you want to have a look at, it's called First Nation ESG. I'm sure most of you will know what ESG is. But when I looked at the ESG framework, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, they seem to miss the point of actually what the First Nation cultural, spiritual understanding of land was. And I found it very strange that they missed this, isn't it? And this is the United Nations. So, I'm sort of thinking, well, anyway, I decided that I'd write a perspective, of a lens on First Nation ESG, and we've been sort of writing the questions around what sustainable ESG models could look like from a First Nation lens. I've been working with the elders and the likes to embed those questions into a self-assessment. So you can do a self-assessment now, and that will show you where you are on the journey. So as I say, if you want to have a look, it's just type in Google FNESG, and that give you an understanding of what that looks like. But some of the work we've been doing is the restoration of land, and I'll give you one of the programs that we worked on. There's an Aboriginal farming land that was in the wheat belt, and that's been restored back to natural habitat. And it's taken 15 years. So, but we've actually just introduced natives. So, what would have been there pre-colonisation, bulk farming of wheat. And about two or 3 years ago, I was fortunate enough to go and camp on the site, and the Aboriginal elders pointed out a red kangaroo and said, we haven't seen them in Beverley for 150 years because of the habitat had been changed beyond recognition. So I'm really interested in working on biodiverse projects and giving the mining community an understanding of how to actually take that land back so that we can heal the land. And I think that's pretty much the Aboriginal understanding, is that they're part of the land, they're part of the spirit, they're part of their expectation of an Aboriginal person is that they need to look after everything. So we've written this into this First Nation ESG, and we're now starting to work with universities to try and embed some micro credentials into the university programs that will actually educate people on what ESG from a First Nation perspective is. So I hope that's enough from me, but if you need any more, just I'll come back. Thanks.
Sure, thank you. Okay, we'll go to Gowan next. Gowan, can you tell us a bit about your organisation and involvement in mine closure and rehabilitation services, please?
Yep. Firstly, I'd like to just acknowledge, the Warra and Kanarakan people, which are the traditional owners of the Rum Jungle site, and also the Larrakia people, where our head office is located in Darwin. As Caroline was saying, I've been working in government and NGOs for a fairly long time in different roles, but since beginning with the Rum Jungle project, within the NT government and Department of Industry, Tourism and Trade, basically been working as a community engagement manager and training manager, which also includes a bit of economic development in the role as well. Basically, we're funded under Australian Government Department of Industry, Science, Energy and Resources under a national partnership agreement. So we're a little bit unique in the fact that we're not a mining company, we're a government agency that's undertaking rehabilitation and restoration of land. So it is a little bit different. I'll just give you a brief context as to the site history, just so that you understand what that is and why that is the case. It's basically was mined back prior to Aboriginal Land Rights Act and the Sacred Sites Act, and prior to self-government. So that just gives you a bit of background of how long ago it was. They mined uranium and copper resources, and it was mined and processed from 1953 to 1971. It has actually undergone closure and rehabilitation in the 1980s, which was, the world's first mine land rehabilitation works, and was quite well received as a leading world at that particular point in time. Whilst it reduced metals and the load to the river by approximately 70%, over time, acid mine drainage has then been leaching into the ground and into the river, and it's less than 1%, up downstream now. So, that's the whole reason why we're doing the rehabilitation, is to actually deal with the acid mine drainage. And then, as we're all here to do, is the rehabilitation and restoration of that country. It's also land that we're actually on, whilst it's part of the Finniss River land claim. The recommendation was that we had to do the rehabilitation work before we could hand it back to traditional owners, and get a certain level of restoration and rehabilitation in accordance to environmental approvals and other things before we hand it back over. So currently it is NT Crown land, which is a little bit unique, because it's statutory obligations with land councils and other sorts of things are a little bit different in how that's applied, and then obviously how we engage, negotiate and undertake the works that we actually have to do in relation to it. We are at stage 3 of the rehabilitation, which is actually the work starting to occur, and pretty well advanced, because negotiations have been undertaken with traditional owners as well as DISA and federal government and NT government since 2009. So that just gives you a bit of context in where we've come from, where we're going, and why we're in the situation that we are currently. And I'll be happy to, extend on that, through questions a bit later.
Brilliant. Thank you. And Zane, can you tell me about the work you're doing, your CRC Time project and other education and training work that you're doing?
Yeah. Thanks for that, Caroline, and thank you everybody for listening in today. As Caroline said, I'm a Wanyee person from Northwest Queensland, and I'd like to acknowledge that I'm on Noongar Whadjuk Whadjuk today. At CRC Time, we have a project. It's looking at a vet qualification framework around negotiations and agreement making for the life of asset in mining and extractive resources. So we're looking at how we train predominantly PBCs, but other First Nation groups who are interested or included in the mining and extractive industries, and how negotiations can be conducted, and what are the different types of mining, and what is the process of mining, and how does mining from the first geologist kicking some rocks and licking some rocks to the final handover to traditional owners at the closure of mining can be strategically managed, not just for the benefit and protection of land mass, but also for the economic and social benefit of First Nation groups in and around that land. And we're developing resources, or they're called short form guides, that'll be based around the different periods of life of asset, that will give explanations about the type of process that's going to happen, what are the commercial opportunities that can happen within those 6 or 7 stages of life of asset, and what are examples of how it's worked in and around Australia. So it's taken a bit of time to put together. We had an ambitious plan that it was going to take 12 months to write these resources, and that took a little bit longer because, as anybody knows, finding data outside of grey literature about successful programs is very hard. So to find those, develop case studies, and to get them put into a format that's usable and readable by mob has taken a bit of time. But then on that, there will be a Cert 2, Cert 3 and a Cert 4 on mining and agreement making for First Nation people. We're expecting that will take another 18 months to 2 years to have the qualifications up for those. They'll be designed, developed and funded by DEWA, Department of Education, Workplace Relations and Employment, I think it is, out of AusMISA, which is the Australian Mining Automotive Services Alliance, which I sit on the board for the mining sector. So that's the vet side of what we're doing. And that's about how to negotiate and plan for projects. The second component of work we're doing is an undergraduate certificate, which is a higher ed qualification for rangers. And the qualification, which is as I said, an undergraduate certificate in land, sea management for rangers. It's an undergraduate certificate in land, sea and river First Nation ranger management and practice, which has been accredited at Curtin. This is built around, and I've got a PowerPoint that can be shared with the group later, that talks about how it's structured, and it's built around a series of cultural stewardship pillars, being land, water, air, spirit, sky, governance, entrepreneurship and leadership. And then they break into areas such as native seed collection and propagation, land restoration, eDNA, remote sensing and technology, GIS and drone applications, monitoring and surveillance of biodiversity. So there's about 25 knowledge domains, and they're broken down into, each knowledge domain has 5 micro-credentials in it, and each micro-credential is about 30 hours of learning, which is 6 workshops. So rangers or people, First Nation land managers or estate managers who are interested in taking skills and learning skills about how best to manage restoration or land management can come in, just take that skill that they want, 30 hours worth of learning, and leave, or they can take a cluster of them and leave, or they can take one from here, and put together 20 units and end up with a graduate certificate, and then progress, if they get enough hours together, to a bachelor degree in land management. So that's where we're at in the undergraduate space. In the postgraduate space, we are currently developing in partnership with Rio Tinto UBC, the University of British Columbia, and one of their partners, BRIM, in Canada, and some First Nation groups there. We're developing a postgraduate certificate in sustainable mine closure leadership. I know I butchered that title, but it's looking at again, life of asset, but not just at engineers and geologists. It's looking at HR, accounts, public relations, the guys in the warehouse, anybody who has anything to do with the life of an asset of a mine. How does mine closure work, and what is the technical side of that, but what's also the social side of that? And that social inclusion includes First Nation principles and ideologies and principles. And we're designing and developing that with our partners in Canada, and that the technical unit and the financial units are currently running between UBC and Curtin University, and the social inclusion First Nation units, which will be 3 of those, should be available by early next year for enrolment in. And then there's the Healing Country program, which is postgraduate research into mine closure. So the whole continuum of education, 12 months ago, 18 months ago, when we were looking at this, Caroline, it's a statistic that continues to blow my brains, is that there were 9 qualifications in the entire world that looked at mine closure as a specific and very discrete unit. Now there's something like 39 different qualifications across vet and higher ed around the world that address mine closure. So, the statistic is $40 billion of assets in the next 10 years. So 153 mines will close. That's $4 billion a year will be spent on mine closure. And we are only just getting to a point of having qualifications to address mine closure. The graduate certificate that Curtin University is developing will hopefully progress to one of the outcomes for CRC time, which is a master's in mine closure, but that will be a staged process. And we're looking at that taking about 3 years, 4 years, and be a partnership between the different university partners of CRC time, and CRC time will be the accrediting body for that. So that's where we're at. It's an accelerated learning opportunity, and we've seen this happen with lithium and batteries and alternate power sources and alternative energy sector. Policy and training is always lagging behind industry need and community expectations, but hopefully through CRC time's leadership, we'll get to that point of answering that before too long. Thank you.
Awesome, that's excellent. Thank you. Yeah, you've pretty much answered my next question, which is about the training that's available and what's planned for the future. I'll jump over to Gowan to see if he wanted to add anything in on that future training initiatives and what's currently on offer. I think you might be on mute.
Sorry about that. I've just got to remember I've got 3 screens open. I couldn't find my cursor. So yes, we're probably not as complex as some of the work that Zane is doing over in that area. Definitely watching that space though. We're with our rehabilitation work, it's a lot of civil work and pushing of dirt and treatment of that dirt to deal with the acid mine drainage. So there's 2 facets that we're focusing on entirely right now, which is land management, which we did 10 traineeships of traditional owners, employed them as NTG employees under traineeships in 2021, and they completed in 2022. From that, we had 5 or 6 of them come across and work full-time as technician 1s levels, and they've been working with our land management unit, focusing wholly and solely on land management. We've been also upskilling them between 2022 and that, where part of their traineeship was the Cert 2 in conservation ecosystem management, workplace infrastructure resources, and then basically doing some specific fire training, upgrading them to Cert 3, CEM, and other certificates and qualifications as they go along, and skill set training, like Zane was sort of saying, that's specific to cultural heritage protection and things like that, in partnership and collaboration with Bachelor Institute. We're just lucky to have them, I guess, next door, stone throw away from the office that I'm sitting in. So we work very closely with them around particular vet training. For everyone that's out there, I know that they are also looking at some higher ed STEM training coming up, which is something that Joe Martin-Jard, the new CEO, mentioned in June at the graduation. So it's definitely a space we're looking at, because we do have a funding commitment to also put some traditional owners, 1 or 2, through a year in a scholarship for some STEM and higher ed training. We're just waiting for, I guess, interest from individuals and also the programs being available and having them on scope so we can support that. Additional to that, as I mentioned, we're doing a lot of pushing of dirt. So we just took on 8 civil construction plan operation trainees. They've been undertaking 3 or 4 qualifications under VET with welding, fencing, Cert 2 in CEM, and the Cert 3 in civil construction plan ops. Now, we're also, because we don't actually have any plant ops and because we don't have any live site works currently on Rum Jungle, we're gearing up towards that. We're trying to get access to a live site agreement with an industry host to get them their logged hours and get their experiences up as part of that. We have 2 business administration trainees that started with us. One's unfortunately withdrawn, but the other one is taking on-the-job work experience placements to get their skills up across all the different IT systems and that, with again in collaboration with Kamali Council, who's next door to us, and Bachelor and ourselves, so that they get some exposure and can get a bit of a feel for what the general workforce outside of NT government is. So we're trying to just broaden their horizons. A lot of these people that we're dealing with the traditional owners, it's their first full-time job. So we've got a lot of wraparound supports in place where we pay for their meals, we house them and cover their accommodation with Bachelor on campus to get the best outcome for them and to remove them from some of the struggles socially within overcrowding houses and stuff within our community systems, just so that they can focus on training as well. And so we've basically got a holistic approach to basically time it out so that they can move into jobs. Once the contractors start breaking ground, they should be skilled up and have the relevant, I guess, industry experience, qualifications to then move into jobs. We've also built that into our tenders through having select tenders and direct tenders, and being able to waive some of the red tape that's involved with government in and around tender processes to be able to support ABEs as well as our trainees moving into employment with those contractors. On top of that, I know we're also talking about collaboration and partnerships. So we also work with some Kanarakan and Warai businesses and also Kamali-based businesses around where we've got opportunity for training on skill sets like chemical handling, traffic management and other such needs. Where there's other employers within the region, we're also trying to offer some upskilling for them as well as our Aboriginal participants within Kamali region, as well as our traditional owners, to basically upskill them through, I guess, bespoke training programs targeting, some job opportunities within the region. Yeah, so it's at various levels. It's basically tailored to what we're hearing is on the ground that's available, as well as what's known with the project, and trying to build that capacity up so that the individuals are best placed. The recent civil construction trainees, as well as our business admin, are on an 18-month traineeship and are employed directly by NT government. And we probably will look at keeping the business admin person and then morphing those other 8 civil trainees into employment with our subcontractors or our head contractors once they're known. Yep.
That's fantastic. So you've got tailored, customized, on-the-job training that's happening. Can you tell me what do some of the participants think? What are some of those outcomes of that training?
What I'll do is I'll actually share a link with you, Caroline, to share with the group. We've got a Facebook page which actually has interviews of those individuals, and then you can direct hand source hear what they've got to say rather than me putting words into the mouths and misrepresenting. But basically, it's summarised in the fact that the mob that we've got on board, and even the traditional owners that we talk to, they want to be able to work on country. They want to be able to restore the country. And given, that country at this particular point in time is known as poison land because of what's been going on over the years with the uranium and then the killing off of the river up downstream. I mean, they want to be a part of fixing that. It may be at the point where it may never get to 100% what it was, but they will be able to use the land, go hunting, fishing, and do some cultural practices back on there once we get it to the level that we're targeting at. Yeah.
Awesome. Excellent. Okay, so we'll jump to Zane and Tim. If there's any comments on, what some of the outcomes of the training that you've seen so far, and what do participants think? What are they getting out of this?
Yeah, look, I saw the opportunity to actually teach some of these micro credentials. I was really interested in what Zane was saying, because obviously he's going down the same sort of path of understanding some of the cultural aspects of healing the land, and Gowan said the same sort of thing. I'll just give you a bit of an understanding. The Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 goals, have only got 6 references to First Nation participation in those goals. So the United Nations have pretty much missed the point of what a sustainable development goal is. Of course, they're not actually listening to the First Nation people and encompassing that in the framework. So again, one of the things I'd like to see is a bit more training around the SDGs, but also there's an opportunity. But I was at a forum last week for the United Nations Western Australia Division, and we had 4 Aboriginal speakers talking about the sustainable goals, and 2 things came out of that meeting. One was they want to be part of the solution, but how do they actually get a voice to those United Nations and put their input into the sustainable goals? And 2, when they want to be in business, they've been denied access to an economy that has seen them as almost part of the welfare system and not a participant in the economy. So they need the skills to be in business if they want to do this themselves. And I think, again, the opportunity there is to create some micro credentials around how the Aboriginal communities can educate themselves to be in business and be sustainable. So I'm very interested. I've already sent Zane a well done, Zane. Can we arrange a catch up? Because I'm very interested to see what you guys are doing and how we can work together.
You're on mute.
Yeah. On that, Caroline, like one of the things that we've picked up and taken what Tim talks about, and we're quite closely aligned in this thought process, is ESG and SER, sustainable ecological restoration, can only be achieved from an Indigenous perspective if we involve Indigenous people from start to finish and we take the learnings. And part of this new approach to learning that we're developing here at Curtin through Professor Stephen Van Leeuwen and the Indigenous Stewardship, Biodiversity, Environmental Group, which I sit in, we're looking at how we don't try and say that Curtin is the holder of all knowledge. So we've gone out and we've partnered with Aboriginal service providers, and one of the examples I'll use is Winyama. So Curtin for the last 25 years has had GIS training available, but it hasn't had the Indigenous context or cultural knowledge and perceptions in that process, and how do we respect the knowledge that is being showed to us. So we've partnered with an Aboriginal owned business by the name of Winyama, and they've developed the curriculum for the GIS mapping, and it's called the Indigenous Mapping Workshop, and they're partnered and funded by BHP and a few other proponents who allow the program to be run around Australia. And Winyama have partnered with us, and they deliver the content, and then we assess and award the micro credential. And we're looking for more partners like that, where it's First Nation advisors who have curriculum, and one of those spaces is going to be cultural burning. So we will have a framework that we need to have, which is an education framework of learning outcomes and assessment requirements. And then we will talk to partners who will create and deliver that. And I'm going to put a plug in for them, and we haven't approached them yet, but Fire Sticks from New South Wales is one of those entities who we will go and partner with, because they've already got the cultural context and knowledge that exists for cultural burning in New South Wales. And we will say to them, hey, how do we work with you to do that assessment? We'll then go and talk with the rangers up in the Northern Territory, and we'll look at how they are doing it. So it's not curtain holding the knowledge and saying we're the keepers of knowledge and we're the only place. We're actually going out to First Nation entities and saying, hey, can we use your knowledge, assess the learnings in partnership with you, and then award an outcome. It's the first time that a curriculum's been designed this way, and there's a PowerPoint presentation which will be part of the recording next week. But if you're interested, just tag me and I'll send it to you. And it talks about how we've designed the curriculum so that the DNA is not all Western science. It's a two-way science, or as we learned it up at Bachelor and in the Northern Territory, it's called both ways learning. And it's a 50-50 blend of First Nation knowledge or First Law and Western knowledge. And then we make sure that that's assessed and accredited in that same way, where it's not a welfare model of knowledge or a lesser knowledge. It's equal to the mainstream knowledge. And I think we've got it right from what we've seen. We've practiced, we've trialed it and piloted it with the Talarak Rangers from Esperance around native seed collection and production. And that's taken the guys from changing their methodology of seed collection, which is currently cut branches off trees to collect seeds. It's actually finding methodologies to vacuum the seeds or shake the trees and collect the seeds that way. And then what we're also finding is right now seed is being sold at a bulk cost, which is including the kernels and leaf litter and all that. So people are paying a lot of money for stuff they don't need. But if we clean off the seeds and we remove the husk and the debris, and we're selling just the seed quality by kilos, the outcomes are a lot more beneficial, because the guys get paid for their time, and the mining company or the project proponent is only buying productive seed, which then goes in the ground. So that training is changing that section of the industry. There also is the requirement then to train the buyers or the mining companies themselves or property developers about how to buy seed, what is it that you're buying and how to use it properly. And that comes with cultural knowledge. So we've got the production side, but then we've got the usage side, and that usage side also needs First Nation knowledge. So the elders that we're getting are helping us design and develop that curriculum. So yeah, I think micro credentials is possibly the best way to answer the ecological restoration space for First Nation people, because when you actually see it in practice, it's very much how we learn. It's learning on country, in country, about country. And that's where the curriculum also will not be delivered at Bentley in Perth. It's a curriculum that's designed to be delivered on country, and we're using the 7 ecological zones of Australia to design the curriculum so that you're only learning about what you need to know on your job, which is another thing that's very different in the curriculum that we're developing.
That's great. Did you want to talk anything about the gaps that exist that you've identified, further training that should be needed into the future?
Yeah, one of the big ones, and it actually came from a workshop, a water stewardship workshop up in Kimberley, and it's about mob are not scared of technology, and this elder said to me, we went from throwing a stick to having one that comes back, and we did it before white fellas did. Wind instrument, didgeridoo was before any wind instrument. We've been designing and developing technology to answer a problem long before the mob learned how to get out of a cave. So what we're trying to look at is how does technology play a role in a lot of this? And remote sensing is the biggest one. Drone technology is going to be a game changer for rangers, and we're seeing that the usage of drones is proliferated. Now you can buy a $400 drone, bang a $85 camera on it, and you can cover an area faster than you can with individuals, but you've still got to go out and ground proof it. So whilst we have the technology advancements, which is one of the biggest gaps, and access to that technology is another one. LiDAR technology and GIS mapping and all that up until now has been quite expensive. With the advent of AI and a few of the more friendly GIS mapping applications out there being cheaper, mob are able to see their country in a different way. And that's the beauty of what technology brings to the ranger domain. In the past, it's just been a very slow, low-tech approach, which has been hampered by native title in a way, but also is now being advanced by native title. But mob are now able to see the burn scars and plan better about country that they may not be allowed to access and cross because it's private owned land or it's crown land that they're not able to access on a regular basis. So the technology is allowing mob to be reconnected to country that they've been alienated with for a long period of time. One of those examples is the SK telescope up near Yamaji country, up near Geraldine. That land has been locked up for 25 years, 30 years now, and it will be locked up for another 80 years. So the Yamaji people won't have access to that land for 100 years. They're already starting to develop a songline to cover that country, and they're using GIS mapping and remote sensing to talk about country that's been locked out from them. There's a couple of defence land masses as well, where mob are using remote sensing imagery to check on the changes and transformations for land and how that's going to be dealt with in the future. So technology is one gap that needs to be addressed in training for ecological restoration. Secondly, and Tim's alluded to it, is the First Nation knowledge, not just in Australia, but around the world, that can help with ESG application. But as my great mate Tyson talks about, it's not just you go to uni and learn about it, you've got to apply it. And old knowledge can only be applied by old cultures, even going forward. So by understanding what's happened in the past, we can plan for the future. And that's where eDNA comes into, and we're understanding what the land actually did look like. Tasmania 200 years ago, 300 years ago, it was not the bushy place it is now. It was a lot more open, and there was a lot more grasslands available. And we can see that in the DNA from the soil samples that they're taking out of swamplands and that now. We're starting to do the same project here in Perth, around the lakes around Perth. We're doing soil samples to see what pollen was present in the past, and we're finding that there's 80% of the plants that were present in the past are no longer here. And we're looking at, councils are now looking at how they can have policies and procedures to encourage people to return those plants. But to return those plants, we need native seed collection. Native seed collection then turns into a nursery. And so we're seeing this economic pathway that will be available to First Nation people if the economic issues that Tim is discussing, where right now First Nation enterprises are still seen as social ventures and welfare. They haven't got access to the capital market that everybody else has. Banks still won't do a full loan for an Aboriginal organisation without a non-Indigenous joint venture partner. So there's these issues that we're trying to address around ecological restoration, which have multiple levers that we have to pull and enablers that need to be turned on before the full benefit of First Nation involvement in the ecological restoration and economy can occur.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah,
so
I've
quite
got
a bit
faith.
of work still to happen.
Oh, yeah. There's two generations.
Yeah. Okay, well, Gowan and Tim, what do you think are some of the challenges individuals and groups face in getting their foot in the door and then building from there?
If you want to go first, Tim, or
You go, Garrett.
all right, I'll go. Yeah, so some of the challenges I know we've been dealing firsthand with is as I mentioned a bit earlier, is with a lot of the younger mob that we're like we've got a range from 18 to 35 years in our age groups, male and female. Some of the challenges are just how families support them in coming to work, and some of the social issues that some of our mob are faced with on a day-to-day basis within community. Hence why we've got all the wraparound supports to try and remove and support them by removing them from that situation, but also giving the ability to focus in on their studies. But that comes with its own challenges as well when we've got young families and single parents within our cohort as well. We can't really remove them too far away. So we even go as far as logistically having to travel 50 to 100 Ks to pick people up and things like that to when they've got car issues and other issues that are going on. But it, to me, that is a challenge. Is I guess a little bit of the having the independence and I guess the structure and taking on that responsibility, but also having family recognise that they need to support them through that process for it to be achievable and manageable. Because we're all here to try, like Tim and Zane have spoken about, we're all here to try and give them that employment opportunity to make generational change in some of these instances within the household. And basically sometimes they're the only people working within that household on a full-time basis. So, getting family to support that, recognise that, but also the individuals to take responsibility around, what their expectations are, because, if we're having troubles with all the wraparound supports that we're providing them now to potentially get them into jobs and get them to work on a day-to-day basis, when we transition them into subcontractors and head contractors moving forward, which is just the structure of how our project is, if they have those days off and don't communicate and things like that, like it's expected in a workplace, then they potentially could just end up unemployed, which we definitely don't want. So some of the challenges are just trying to reiterate responsibility, expectation, communication, those basic, I guess day-to-day principles that we all have to abide by in a workplace, and it's just trying to impart them, but then also getting the family to support them and not make it hard for them, and help them as much as they can, because it is a whole family thing. I mean, I learnt that when I was going through traineeships as a young lad. If I didn't have my parents taking me to work and things like that, or pulling me into line for having late nights or whatever, I know I wouldn't be where I am there today, because they as well as the workplace ingrained, I guess, personal responsibility into me and made me get personal traits that now I try to impart on others and share and mentor and coach people through those challenges, because I can see it happening firsthand. And like I say to them, we're a family in the workplace. We're a family. You know, if you need support, I'm here for you. About any issues, whether it's personal, private, we can put supports in place and help you through that journey. We just need to know about it. If you don't talk to us, we can't help. So it's just getting people to break down some of those barriers that they have in sharing and talking and communicating, but also not being shame in sharing those challenges with people, because nobody's perfect. We all go through different challenges in our lives, you know, no matter who we are. And we all need help, and we shouldn't be afraid to ask for it. So that's what we're just trying to impart and get them to get to that point. We've got 6 months left in the traineeship before we get to that point where it starts handing over. So, you know, it's just, that's what I've seen as the biggest challenge, to then get them into full-time employment with the head contractor and getting a foot in the door within the industry. But that's also why we have put in a lot of those wraparound supports, because we're aware of them, but we also still, you know, I don't think have the model perfect, as even with all the supports we have in place. There's always something that comes up, but we are very supportive and adaptive to trying to offset those challenges and get the outcome that we're all after. Yeah.
Brilliant. That's perfect. I'd like to hear some of the success stories like that. Okay, so who needs to come together to work on some of those gaps? What support is needed from industry, government, researchers, community? We'll jump to Tim for this question.
Yeah, great. Look, I'm thoroughly enjoying this conversation, because I think I thought I was the only person having this sort of conversation with, but obviously you guys are well advanced on understanding some of these issues. I actually met last week with Main Roads and the Wheatbelt Development Commission, and we brought one of the Dingo boys from Fitzroy to talk to us about the crisis that was created when the Fitzroy Bridge flooded, and what Main Roads tried to do with the community up there. They actually engaged the whole of the community and employed something like 65 Aboriginal workers on the repair of that bridge. Now, it was a crisis, but it just shows what can be achieved if the intent is there. They basically brought them onto the job. They're exactly what Gowan said. They acted like family. If they didn't turn up for work, they went and knocked on their door and said, "Where are you? You know, you need to be at work. You need to be doing this." I had the same experience when I was CEO of Thalangie up in the Pilbara. We were doing monitoring work, and when they were turning the earth to build the Gorgon and Wheatstone projects, and again, I would actually send somebody round to knock on their door if they didn't turn up for their monitoring. So I know it's just silly things like that that we actually have to just understand that, you know, they've got these issues around the family, around, you know, late nights, and as you say, they just need a bit of help. And once you've got them into the workplace, and you're training, we've actually trained one as a quality surveyor as part of that project, and he's now setting up his own business, and so everything's possible. It's just that we've got to have that intent to start with, and just really try and guide these guys into being part of the economy, and not being seen as a recipient of welfare. So that's from me.
Great. And any comments from Zane?
Yeah, look, I think there's an interesting statistic that's just come out of the ABS. Last month, we officially reached a population of 1 million First Nation people identified in Australia. So when you start thinking about that's 1 million people. If we take out the sick and affirmed, long-term jail, and children under the age of 16 or 18, the estimation is there's about 320,000 employable First Nation people in Australia. If we can't find a job for 320,000 First Nation people in Australia, then we're failing dismally. And that's the first point I want to make. When we start looking at mining as a sector, or the extractive industry, which most of us are in, Indigenous employment, I think, is travelling at about 10,000 or 11,000 people are employed by the sector. I think we've tapped out the people that are interested in being in what I call yellow caterpillar dreaming, who want to sit on a piece of equipment inside a mine working or a extractive process. When we look at the ranges that sit around that, there's about 4,500 people employed currently as rangers. The Commonwealth Government are looking to expand that and grow it to about 7,500 in the next 5 years. And by 2030, the estimation, there's going to be about 10,000 people employed in the ranger or land management sector. For us to get to that 10,000, there's still a lot to do. One thing is mob love working on country, and you don't have to encourage them a lot to get them to go to country and work. But there has to be reasonable wages. There has to be easy access to those positions, and there has to be training with it. If we can't address those three issues, then we're going to continue to fail. So my challenge for myself and for everybody here today is, what are we doing in the way of training for mob? Is it appropriate training? And that's what Gowie's struggling with up there at Rum Jungle, getting appropriate training for their guys for the jobs they want to go to. The Commonwealth Government have stopped funding away from base funding for Aboriginal university students. We don't have the VET or the VET sector anymore, vocational education training, that mining companies and industry had access to, where the support services were being funded. That got too successful, so that got defunded. And we're not seeing Centrelink or Social Security doing what it used to do, which is career advice. So there's an opportunity for people out there to go, okay, how are we developing Indigenous employment programs? How are we developing Indigenous economic development programs? And I think that there's some real good learnings out there. We just don't share well enough. I can tell you there's 5 different mines that are within 200 k's of each other who have the answers for each other, but don't talk to each other. And that's probably the biggest barrier we've got, is this sharing of knowledge and sharing of successes. The papers are happy to tell us what goes wrong in this space, but the papers aren't very good at telling people what's succeeding and linking people, which is why I love the seminars, the webinars you put together, Gillian. It's bringing together people to find answers and solutions, not just point out the problems. So yeah, thanks for giving us this opportunity.
Perfect. The next question for anybody to answer is, what actions should government take to help meet workforce and skills training demand and needs? Who would like to start?
Gary, you want to start on that one?
Yeah, I'll start. Look, I think from what I'm actually hearing with Bachelor and in relation to the C program and how they've sort of expanded the reach of that into Cert 1s and Cert 2s moving forward, where it was a little bit restricted back in the time. I think there's some things that are occurring in this space that are sort of, the one thing I'd say, working in government for 30 years, it's cyclical. So every 10 years the old policies and programs tend to come back up, just in a renamed and retagged sort of format, because they realised that was actually working better than the predecessor. So, like CDP, for example. So there are those sorts of things where I think things are slightly improving. However, like Zane saying, the biggest challenge, and I came from workforce development within Department of Industry, Tourism and Trade, was the targeted and tailored responsive skilling grants. There seems to be a move away from that, from on-country learning, like Zane was saying, to sort of your public providers, which I found quite ironic given, and I'll probably get to be careful how I say this, given that smaller RTOs tend to be able to provide that on-country training because they've got the time and the energy, and that's sort of where their cohorts are. But they are also businesses, so to move away and then start support publics sort of goes against the grain of supporting business in a way as well. So it is a bit interesting. I think it's that there definitely needs to be a bit more thought around away from base or having block training like Bachelor does sometimes, or used to do with ranger groups with compliance, fishing compliance and other trainings, where they would have them here and then use the lake for practical training and things like that. Having that ability to do that, and then having the mentors and your supports in place and wraparound supports to get better outcomes. There needs to be probably reverting back to those sorts of models and having a bit more access, at least have that on the table for mob.
Yeah, exactly. The pathways need to be more flexible and particularly, you know, because you've got this exactly the small RTOs are doing it. What about the big ones? Can't they do it too? You know, it's very competitive to get into VET. You're competing against a lot of people. There should be more of those identified available positions for people to take up. Zane,
can I just comment? If that's okay, I've been working in this sector for, you know, this is my 6th or 7th year with the Aboriginal community. What I found is that government fund these things, but don't give the self-determination to the Aboriginal community. So they come up with ideas that they believe will work, but I can talk about SBDC. I can talk about Indigenous business banking. I can talk about all these services that are subsidised millions and millions and millions of dollars every single year, but don't actually get to the Aboriginal communities because it's white driven, it's Wadjura driven. It's basically, they've created their own economy on education of Aboriginal people and not allowing them to self-determine. So I think one of the things that government have got to do is to take the risk to actually hand some of this learning to the Aboriginal communities themselves and let them actually self-determine what they want to learn and how they want to learn, rather than keep telling them, oh, you won't get an Aboriginal person walking in an SBDC. It just doesn't happen. But, you know, we fund it. So I think government's literally got to take the leap of faith and actually allow people like, you know, my organisation was set up by 6 Aboriginal leaders. We've got Gordon Cole, Oral Maguire, Danny Ford, Michael Hayden, Shana Collard, and sorry, I've forgotten the last one. But anyway, they basically set this up themselves. They've had no funding whatsoever, you know, and everything they do is voluntary. There's no money in it for them. So sorry, Karen Jacobs was the other director. And so they do all this work for themselves, but actually get no funding. So there's no money to do anything. So, and we keep sort of saying, you know, we want to be participants in the economy, but you've got to actually allow us to do that. So I think government really needs to change, you know, trying to put policy and training without allowing self-determination.
Zane, did you want to add a comment?
Yeah, I'm a bit like Gary. I've got to be careful I don't step in my own tongue. The policy framework, I think that we're going to see come with this change of leadership at a federal level with Miranda McCarthy taking over the role, I think there's some good sounds coming out of the department now about where we're going to see some changes. But very much, I want to echo what Tim and Gary have said is there needs to be a greater focus on succession planning. I think is the only way we can really frame this now. You know, we've had the welfare, we've had the holding hands stuff. I want to acknowledge and recognise that industry is probably leading a lot of this change too. The big mining companies and some of the smaller mining companies, the number of 10 years ago when I came to WA with John Holland, I did an analysis of truly Aboriginal owned businesses, and there were 197 businesses that a First Nation hand signed the checks. Now there's something like 655 Aboriginal businesses in the mining and extractive sector in WA, where a black hand signs the bank account and checks. And that growth has happened purely because the resource sector has stepped up into this space and led a lot of the changes, divorced of government policy. So, you know, on one hand, we have this opposition with First Nation and mining over one aspect, but on another side, we've got a great relationship where the aspirations of First Nation people are being heard by mining companies and project proponents and supported. And you know, we've just got to find some way to show government that this can happen with their support. And we don't need to have a bunch of consultants always telling mining companies and First Nation people how to do it. There's answers out there. Between the two of us, we can find answers. So yeah, that's probably where I'm at. Yeah.
Yeah. So we've talked about what government can do. What actions could industry take?
I'll take a shot at this one simply because of my seat on the swap with Osmosis and the Minerals Skills Council. One of the big things that we need to take is a slightly less protectionist mechanism or approach to employment. I'm not saying lower the bar. Let's keep the bar where it is. Yes, zero drugs and alcohol. Not zero criminal history, but a lesser criminal history. There is, within the Minerals Act, anywhere in Australia, the capacity for a mine manager to allow a person who does not have or has held in the past a license to drive to have a job on a mine site. So there's a rule there that can be turned on and off at the discretion of somebody in HR and at the mine site. The criminal history, again, that's a mechanism which is there to find out who you're employing, not to stop people from being employed. And it's just a slight change in the psyche of HR within a mining company and labour hire companies. But we know that there is employment programs out of prison, such as the project down at Pinjarra at Fairbridge. Until last year it was running, which was a mining training program. They came out with their certificate 3 in mining, and they were guys walking straight out of jail onto site. So we've got a company doing it. We just need the sector to do it. There are some absolute awesome programs. I'll put a pitch in for a company that I used to work for, and no, I don't own shares in this company anymore, but Ernest Henry Mine in Cloncurry had a mums and bubs program, which ran from 9 till 2 every day. And they would have single parents come out to the mine site, which was 30 minutes out of town, to do hot seating across the breaks. So when we allow industry to be creative in a productive way, they can be. And I just think we need to be careful that there's some IR laws that need to not be brought in to stifle employment growth. And if we can do that in a productive way, we'll get some great outcomes. Industry has led the mining sector has led the employment numbers for the last 5 years or 6 years, I think it is, for the number of young Indigenous females. So that's anybody under the age of 25 who is a female who's Indigenous. The mining sector has been the highest uptake of that group. And that's when I say the extractive industry, I also include exploration and drilling. I think drilling this year, there's been 290 or 280 traineeships offered Australia-wide for young Indigenous females to take up drilling as a qualification and a career pathway, which, again, is not a government-funded initiative. It's an industry-funded initiative. And we don't hear enough of the positive. And again, Gillian, through CRC time and yourself, Caroline, there is a word that keeps coming out of conversations I have with you guys, and that's enablers. And that's what we've got to start looking at, is what are the enablers that occur in the sector, and how do we share them with each other? And I think that's our webinar series in itself, is, what are the enablers that come out of sector, and how we can educate government on what is true partnership.
Perfect. I think that's a good spot to end it on before we go to there's a few questions in the chat, and then we'll do a bit of a final wrap up for 1 o'clock. So this question is in regards to people working on country, particularly rangers. How can mining or industry support the training and engagement of rangers in monitoring and land management projects, and how can we help that to grow the ranger program? Does anyone want to?
If that's all right, I'll field that one. I'll talk about the Pilbara Ranger initiative. The big guys up there, BHP, Rio, FMG, Roy Hill, a couple of years ago identified it as a employment space that wasn't directly related to their operations, but contributed to the benefit of their operations. And they've stepped in and they've helped out quite a lot. Each state government, and in WA it's DBCA, Department of, I'm not even going to try and work the acronym out, but DBCA have a support ranger program where they fund mentoring for rangers, and the mining companies have tipped in on that. I know that there's a number of sites in and around the Pilbara and the Kimberley region where the mining companies have allowed seats to be taken up by TAFE lecturers to get out to the guys, and vice versa, to bring them in. I know that the conservation land management qualifications are about to be reviewed, or underway being reviewed, and so is the RRI, the Resource Infrastructure Industry training packages being currently reviewed. So there's a push to change to meet the need of the sector, and how that's going to happen will play out over the next 12 months. The Industry Skills Council for these packages, the CLM, AHC and Horticultural Forestry, they've been operating for 2 years now, 3 years. So they're starting to learn what the industry needs in this modern space. So yeah, there's a lot of positive stuff happening, but you've almost got to be in the right place at the right time to hear this. The conservation qualifications weren't even part of the Australian Bureau of Statistics, Australian New Zealand employment codes until 2 years ago, 3 years ago. So none of the rangers were being captured, and I still think the rangers aren't being captured in the current round of ABS data. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. TAFE can't find enough lectures to deliver the qualification, and then we've got this disbursement of ranger groups. I don't know if anybody's had a look at the latest IPA and ranger groups, but there's nearly 470 ranger groups Australia-wide. If you allow for 6 to 8 people to be employed in each one of those, that's a sizable workforce. But again, it's the disbursement of these ranger groups there can be 100 kilometres between two ranger groups, and they can't get together to meet, let alone get an academic or a lecturer out to deliver to 6 people. The cost is prohibitive, and that's not a cop-out, it's a reality. So we've got to find ways to bring back the away from base training, find a way to get technology to work, internet to work for mob out there, and then to have access online to supplement and not become an answer to training for mob. So yeah, it's a big question, and it's a hard one to deal with. But I think there's an opportunity rather than a barrier for it.
Yep, thank you. This other question is probably Gowan, you might want to answer this one or have a go at it. So government or other bodies outside of industry, how can they support PBCs to establish scaffolding and support around ranger programs and building business capabilities for that long-term sort of restoration of country?
Yeah, I'm glad we're talking a little bit about the economic stuff, because I think that goes hand in hand with what we're talking about, because then it answers what Tim's talking about in relation to self-determination and that, because the drive and the connection to country and mob working in that area is a lot higher, probably a lot better results in retention and everything else as well, and getting, I guess, tailored outcomes for all. What we've done with us is, again, coming from that business and workforce sort of area that I did just come from a couple of years ago, I did notice, and have been noticing for the last 10 years, a lot of the programs and grants are all going online. So a lot of our mob with digital literacy, for instance, and I don't profess to be an expert in it as well. A lot of people get lost on the internet and things like that. So if you go back 15, 20 years, there used to be a lot of hands-on supports and mentoring, and I guess actually putting in supports for the first 1 to 5 years for an economic business, where a lot of these businesses fall down. We should be focusing a lot more on those two particular topics, is starting a new business, growing a new business, but also hands-on support in doing applications and grants and giving them practical experience and supports in how to write that, how to apply for that, because a lot of the feedback I was getting from some of our TOs and stuff like that, when they do put in for grants, was they're getting knocked back and they just get a generic email that doesn't actually explain what they needed to improve on, or feedback on what they should have added more detail about and things like that. So they can't grow on that journey. They struggle, and then they get frustrated and then disengage. So on that economic side, I think there's definitely a bit more we can do in that space. With the training side, I think, look, and the ranger side, it's a bit unique with us because we don't actually have a ranger group for our area, because the two clan groups that we're on don't get along too well in certain circumstances, and don't allow each other to progress that, which is probably a challenge that we probably should have spoken about earlier as well, because in relation to economic development on country, on land trust and stuff like that, you need section 19s. And to do that, because this is a joint recognised traditional owner land trust, you can imagine the challenges that has in relation to setting up any economic businesses or ranger groups when one group doesn't agree with the other group, and then sort of that tall poppy syndrome and bringing each other down rather than working collaboratively, like what's happening with Tim's examples that he was mentioning and things like that, which is the ideal space to be, because if you've got that collaboration, you have a bigger voice at the table, you can get more things done, you can address some of the concerns that Zane was talking about, because you have more access to potential support mechanisms and money, because you've got a groundswell of people that you can then attract some of that support for, versus, like Zane was saying, 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 people where it just becomes unfeasible to run programs with. So I think hopefully that gives a bit of an answer to that question. But yeah, that's my thoughts on that topic. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. 100% agree with that. And I think we've sort of run out of time. We could probably talk forever, I think, on this topic. But I think we've come to the conclusion, unless there's just one small Tim comment. Do I want to stop you from saying something? It looked like you were going to say something.
Yeah. I'm keen to chime in here. One of the problems that we've got as well is these, the land settlements have been agreed with say the Noongar nation, but as part of that, 6 groups needed to be set up, and those 6 groups basically need to have an economic plan and a sustainable plan and everything else. And unfortunately, they're not business people. They're, for greatest respect for what they do, but they're there for culture. They're there for language. They're there for other things. They're not there for business. So they are expected to also do the business, and they're not qualified to do that. And so we're actually setting them up to fail. And somehow we as mobs got to come together and agree how we're going to go forward with regards to the economic participation, because like the Chamber of Commerce, if you like, is the peak body for business, and it should be helping those 6 organisations to prosper. But we can't seem to actually agree between the 7 of us how to move forward. And so we're almost sort of seen as a competitor and not a provider of the solution. So that for me needs to be addressed. So that's an Aboriginal thing, not a Wadjala thing. So I think we need to get that perspective right as well.
Yeah, totally hear you. I think we've talked a bit about the challenges, and one of the questions that I had was what do we have to look forward for and be positive about? But I think we've answered that, because we've got people like you guys working in this area on these problems. And what I've heard today is that there's some really great initiatives. There's a lot of things that we've learnt and we're still learning. It's a continuation. But we've identified a few things that we think that we could do better on, and continuation of some of the really good things, positive, like succession planning, customized support, that wraparound service to overcome the barriers. I think that's really needed. Flexible and adaptive pathways, making sure that there is room for people, there is room for mob to have a voice, but also to be able to access this training and this education, and having the co-design, the First Nations co-designing in this training program. I think this is really, really important stuff. I just want to bring up the final slide, if we could, Ben. I think just to wrap up quickly, because we're out of time, this initiative is not the conclusion of this initiative, but possibly the last webinar for now. So we're holding a continuation of discussion at the CRC Time Forum, which is there's a specific workshop that will highlight the information we've heard, the lessons learned, where to from here, and how, if this is an initiative that people think is useful, how can it be continued on. So I wanted to thank all the speakers today and over the past series for your support, and for all the people that have taken time to listen in. We hope that this pilot will become a series that does continue in the future. So please do look out for a short SurveyMonkey questionnaire where you can provide your valuable feedback. And as usual, there's the QR codes if you're not used to the CRC Time and SMI. You can join our web newsletters here, so you don't miss out on any of the action. So I just wanted to say thank you, and if Roger and Julia wanted to say thanks as well. Now's your opportunity.
Yes, seconded. Thank you, everyone. It's been fantastic.
Yeah, look, that was a great discussion, and I just learned so much, and the prospects of that training that Zane was talking about sounds fabulous. And gee, Tim, if you can get together with Zane, I'm sure that would be a great outcome of this webinar itself. And thanks, Gow. And gee, that's a lot of work up there. In trying circumstances too. Thanks.
Thank you, Caroline.